Hello, hello, hello. This is Angel Aviles with Living Firme, bringing you another episode of 30 Inspiring Women. And today we have someone that I don't really know yet, but I'm so excited to get to know. Her name is Alvarado, and she is an artist. She's an admirer of Sharpies, Latin-inspired art, wood panels, bold colors, messy hands, old Spanish tiles, the violin, peppermint oil lip gloss, and Home Depot. I am so excited because Sparkles actually insisted that we do this interview with you. So I've seen your work, and I'm flabbergasted by pretty much everything. Your Instagram page is my new addiction. It's just incredible. I start every one of these podcast interviews with a basic question, and that was, what was the culture of your life like, and how did you end up where you are today?
I was raised by my grandparents, was raised in East LA, and I was taken away from my mom when I was 6 years old. And so I had to live in a foster home for a little bit over a year, and then got put into my grandfather's care, my grandmother. And early on going through that kind of system, you have to go through therapy. And because I was a quiet little girl, one of the ways for them to get me to open up was through drawing. So I found that was kind of at the time my real way of communicating, and not really realizing that it was going to really be the way I was going to communicate. A lot of my deepest and kind of roughest times in my life, but also some of the happiest moments of my life, are often expressed in a lot of my artwork. So I really just found that as a way to communicate without really having to use words. If I could draw an emotion, I wasn't planning to do that. I was just really planning to get lost in my art, and it was kind of a way of healing. And so that's where I'm at. I still draw. The little girl in me was drawing, and now as an older woman, I still find that I can still get lost in my art, and it's still healing.
So that brings me to the question of one of your you've had a couple of really successful series. The series that, of course, blew me away completely is the Little Freida series. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh, that's such a fun series. So that series came about because my daughter, who was 7 years old at the time, came into my room and said, "Mom, why does everybody love Freida?" And it wasn't this, I love Freida too, and so tell me why everyone else loves her. It was really just why does everybody love Freida? Because she just didn't understand it. And so I explained to her what Freida represented to me, what I believe Freida to represent to many. And my daughter just kind of looked at me like, okay, and walked out, and a couple minutes later walked back in and said, I was thinking, I wonder what Freida was like as a little girl. And I thought, that's interesting. I'm sure she was a lot like the way she was as an adult, but I don't know, Tatiana. That's pretty interesting when you think about it. And so that day, I actually worked on a Freida piece. It was an illustration because it wasn't a Sharpie piece, like the traditional Sharpie pieces that I do on wood. So I was kind of sketching it out. So it was Freida sitting down, and it was a traditional Freida as an adult woman. And that day, my daughter had to go to one of her first competition classes in jiu-jitsu. And she was really nervous, and she was like, "Mom, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do it. I'm not strong like the other kids. Like, what if I get hurt, Mom? I don't think I can do this." And I said, and it was kind of a quote that I had saw a couple of weeks ago. And I said, "Tatiana, you can do anything. You really could do anything." And she was like, "No, Mom, I can't. I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to get hurt." And I'm like, "Beautiful girl, you could do hard things. You got to start somewhere." She was like, "Okay," and still like little, her eyes were all welled up in tears, and she went off, and she had a successful first day and came back feeling really, really great. As she went away with her dad, I'm completing the piece. So, of course, it made sense to me when I did it. I wanted to add the quote, "Beautiful girl, you can do hard things." So from there, it kind of really stuck with me. I wonder what Freida was like as a little girl. Why did she have to be fierce? Was her imagination really that big? And all these things, like, I started to ask these questions. And so later on, Tatiana and I, we kept talking more about it. And I'm like, I'm going to draw a little Freida as a girl. You know, there's pictures of Freida as a little girl, but I'm like, I'm going to draw her the way I think she would look. And I kind of modeled her after my little cousin Emma, who my family fondly nicknamed Freida. I kind of started to do that, but I didn't want to draw Emma, but I liked the likeness of it, and I kind of wanted to capture some things that I thought that the little girl Freida would look like. And so I remember drawing her, and it was a profile, and she was her side profile, and she's looking up. And I thought, oh, it's going to be about dreaming big. And so sure enough, I go ahead and I do it. And the moment, and it's just a line drawing, that's all it is. And the moment I do it, I automatically start getting all these DMs. What is she going to look like? Are you going to do another one where we can see her face to face? Is the original purchased already? I'd like to buy it. And I'm like, I haven't even put color in it, but I think people were just used to me sketching, knowing that I was going to do a piece, for an original wood piece. And so I kind of left it alone, and every one that I did after that was this lesson for Tatiana. I kind of not realizing, honestly, that the lesson was also for me, or it was a reminder of something that I was forgetting. And so in sharing it with Tatiana and me wanting to empower my daughter, it was reminding me of the little girl in me who was still afraid to dream big. Oftentimes thinking, well, I don't deserve this. I didn't work hard enough, and this is not meant for me. I had to believe the words that I was teaching my daughter in order for her to take it in. I had to believe them myself. And so there was one piece and then another, and then it was the being fierce, and then it was believing. And we got to one where it was now themed for Day of the Dead, and everybody knows how important it is, that special day and the days that lead up to it. It is more of honoring, the memory of our loved ones. And so she understands the building of the altar and all these different things. When it came time to draw that piece, Tatiana had to figure out what she wanted to put on the altar. So Tatiana indirectly is my little Freida. I didn't realize it was going to mean so much to a lot of women, to a lot of young girls. And I was really overwhelmed by the response, and I still continue to be in awe because I feel so privileged that I get to create work that people want to put in their home, they want to hang in their office, they want to gift it to a loved one, they want to decorate their baby's room in that theme. And here, I feel like what they're attracted to is all the love that I put into each of those pieces. There's still so many ideas. Tatiana and I have a list, and we have a project, and she's so proud of it, and she knows that that's for her. And in fact, this past weekend was the Women's March, and so we did the Fight Like a Girl piece, and we did little Freida dressed in the shirt that Tatiana had, that we had purchased from Tito's Mundo. So that was a real treat. And then getting permission from him to put the shirt in the piece was just the icing on the cake. And what was really great was Tatiana attending this first march. She had created her sign. She was so excited the morning of, woke up at 3 o'clock and said, Mom, I can't go to sleep. I'm so excited. And got up, and we went to the march, and she saw so many young girls that looked like her with signs that said, Fight Like a Girl. She was so proud to represent, but at the same token, she was excited to be in the midst of all these women and all these people standing up for her indirectly. This is why it's so important to keep creating art that has purpose. And so that's where the little Freida came from.
I really love that on so many levels. And a couple of questions came to mind during that whole process. One is that, well, I guess this is a statement, but in certain indigenous cultures, they feel like stories are spirits and they find their way into the vessel who is the storyteller. And when you were telling me this story of healing and you being self-healed through this gift that God has given you, it reminded me of that because you were the vessel that just created out of the greatest power of all, which is love. And I just think that that is phenomenal and that everyone who sees these pieces can feel that love. The other point that really resonated with me was when you talked about being the little girl who felt like you didn't deserve it, and that was the lesson that you were sort of therapeutically and artistically working through. Let's talk about that a little bit more and why that little girl still has a place inside of you.
I think not understanding why you can't live with your mom. What many don't know was that my mom, as much as she was loving and as funny and so full of life and so memorable to so many people, my mom was addicted to heroin for over 20 years. And that resulted in me being taken away. And so I constantly grew up with this, oh my God, you're Epi's daughter. Oh my God, you're Rebel's daughter. Like, oh, they're so great. And blah, blah, blah. And they would talk about all the memories they had and how wonderful. My mom and my dad were from two different rival gangs. And it was like, oh, but your parents are great. And so here you grow up with, if they're so great and there's these wonderful people, how is it that I'm not with them? I'm not good enough. So there was that constant, I'm not good enough because, my mom loved her drugs so much. My dad couldn't get his life together enough to not be in and out of jail. And so I think that I had already just had that. And as wonderful of a job as my grandfather did, I remember being a young girl and falling in love with God at 9 years old. And even though I felt like I was created by this amazing, unbelievable, there's no words to describe what the Most High is, but knowing that I was created in His likeness, and I just felt like I was special. And the moments when I was closest to God, I felt that. But outside of that, I just still didn't feel like I was enough. And not like in a horrible way. I always wanted to believe the best in people and all these good things, and I'm a happy-go-lucky person, and I believe all these great things are going to happen for people. But for me, I didn't want to dream big. I wanted to be realistic. This is my life. This is where I'm from. This is what happens. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. You make do with what you have. You work through it. You rise above it. Your challenges, you stand on top of it. You move forward. Like, that's what you do. I don't have time to dream growing up. I didn't have time to think I was going to get all these other things that were bigger than I could imagine because I was a realist. This is my life. I fast forward and I feel like I've had incredible favor. But in that, I think the little girl comes up and, realizes, hey, wait a minute. You need to believe that you are enough, that you can achieve more, that you can have it. And I started to kind of see it more when I had my daughter. So when I'm teaching her the lessons, I thought how interesting that it's so easy for me to share with her and to empower her, but yet I couldn't fully 100% do it with myself. It's kind of in this way like holding me accountable.
The story about the mom not being there or the dad not being there, drugs, prison, these are, they're familiar, they can be familiar, and not just in the hood, but familiar in our country, familiar in the world. People constantly One, looking for that escape, because it seems like the easy way until you're in the trap and you realize that it's the hardest thing ever. I myself have a brother who died as a result of his drug addiction, so I'm very familiar with that. I'm very familiar with the pain and the havoc that it wreaks on families. But the interesting perspective about you as it relates to this group of women is that you are sharing as you go. So you're not sharing from the perspective of, oh yeah, this happened to me back in the day and now I've gone through it. You are going through it, and I just want to call out how brave that is. And how important it is for the women listening to this podcast. We don't have to wait till we've arrived at a certain place to start sharing our healing journey. And so as you are developing and pouring your love into this beautiful, precious gift that you have in a daughter, and you are pouring it out with the gift that you have received as an artist, you are in turn pouring into yourself and being healed because you are living according to your purpose. And that's amazing. And I'm so glad that you chose to be brave enough to share that perspective with us. I also want to talk about your education because, one, in looking at your artwork, and I really didn't go on and on in the beginning about how badass you are as an artist, but like next level badass. You have multiple, yes, you're welcome. You have multiple styles. You have obviously like your Latina theme, but you have everything from like your little Freida series, which is so innocent and sweet and pure and colorful and full of joy and love, to your wood selfies, your Latina images, your very sensuous women. Tell me about, obviously your art took you in a very interesting way out of the current circumstances of the pain that you were in as a child. Tell me about your journey into pursuing your education as it applied to art.
That one's interesting. So right out of high school, I started working for a law firm, and I had an opportunity to go work for a nonprofit organization. At 19 years old, I moved over to work in philanthropy, fundraising for a large nonprofit organization. So I went over to the organization knowing that they were going to be moving out of state to Washington State. So I would have to leave California, and I'm the oldest of 21 grandchildren, and so I kind of felt like no one's left LA, like everyone's still living, in the neighborhood. And I was like, I need to do this. I really need to do this. I don't have any kids. I think this will be good. And so I was married. I got married really young. I was married at 19 to my first husband. And I was like, we're never going to do it. This is the time to do it. So we went. I dove into my work, was really successful as a fundraiser. But my boss, the director at the time, had said one of the things that he required from all his staff was that we had to go to school. We had to take a class. It didn't matter if it was in pottery. It didn't matter if it was in English, literature. It didn't matter. We had to do something for ourselves. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, I got to go back to school. At the time, my younger cousin was talking about going into a nursing program. She wanted to go into it at ELAC. So, of course, I'm the older cousin, like, you need to do this, and this is really important, and this will be really great for you, and I believe in you. And then she says, yeah, it's really easy for you to say, but when you actually go to school, art school, and you actually do something that you love to do, then you can kind of come talk to me. And I thought, oh, man, she just called me out. Snap, like, all right. And then, of course, like, I don't even go small. Like, I go big. Like, it wasn't even, like, let me try to take a class at the local JC. It was like, let me try to see if I could get into art school. Like, it's so naive of me to think that I could just walk in with, like, no portfolio, just my sketches from, like, high school, some of the things that I did. But, like, what's the worst they're going to tell me? No. And that's kind of been my philosophy in life. So I sign up, they go and they interview you and they ask to see your work. They're going to review your work. Of course, like I said, I didn't have a portfolio, but they liked my style. Back then, I loved pencil and ink work. And I painted predominantly men. There's something about the lines of character, the shading, just something that I just loved. So I had a lot of men in the images, and so I get accepted. I get accepted into the Art Institute. This is great, but now I work full time, and I'm traveling for work. And then in that, I'm now deciding that I'm going to go back to school full time. Like, I wasn't even taking a class. Like, I decided I'm going to go in it. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. I go to art school and I go in for graphic design because it makes sense, because it could help in what I was doing, in my fundraising job. And if I wanted to move into a different marketing position, like, this would be really great. I'm thinking, like, I'm going to be the package. And I'm in it, and into my third year, I get pregnant with my oldest son. The doctor says at 8 months, you got to stop going to school. And I didn't want to, and I said, okay, I'm going to come back. And then, of course, I had Aaron. And at the time, my ex-husband felt that I was having an affair with art. And it was really hard. It was a strain on the relationship. And so art was kind of a negative thing for him. And so here I have the kids, and I just kind of focus on the kids. And knowing that my relationship wasn't 100%, and still kind of fight, in the thought that it would be over soon, and just, no, I'm going to pour into this. I'm going to pour into my kids. I love my kids, and we're going to work through this. I gave up art for just about 9 years. One day, my son comes in. He says, Mom, I need help drawing this. Can you help me? And I said, sure. So I immediately pick up a pencil and I start to help him. And he's like, you're good, Mom, you're good. And of course, now I'm going to be like, well, yeah, of course. Like, back in the day, I could draw. And he was like, sure you could, Mom, sure. And I'm like, no, I could. And he's like, let me see, draw this. And it was a picture of a man strumming a guitar. And so I stood there. For a really long time, hours. And I drew this hand. And it was at that moment that I realized, I've missed you. I've missed graphite. I missed the shading. I missed all of this. And it was like riding a bike again. And then because it came at a time where I was really on my way out, it was my outlet to escape, to still be at home, but to escape. And to escape in my thoughts in something that was just very personal. I started up and doing line work and doing some pencil work. And then I was like, I want to paint, because I had taken a few painting classes, in art school, because you have to. But really it was just more for graphic design and for print production. So I was like, I'm going to paint. But it's so funny to say I had the hardest time even trying to come up with something to paint, because I was so afraid to make a mistake with color, because I don't work with color. I was like, I'm just going to do it, and I'm going to be forgiving. That's what I told myself. Just be forgiving. Just whatever feels good. So I started to paint, and I was like, oh, I like this. This feels good. But it didn't have the control the way you do with a pencil or a pen. And so a brush is very different, and paint is fluid, and just there's just a lot of blending in different ways, and I just didn't quite know how to control that. And so I created a piece, and it was the piece of 3 women, and I was waiting for the piece to be done. I thought that it was completely dry, and I had to show it that night because a friend had asked if I would just kind of fill up the space. She was hosting an event for women at her local nonprofit that she was working at, and just wanted some art to fill up the walls. And so I said, oh, yeah, of course. And so I go to sign the painting that I thought was dry with a Sharpie marker, because I had a packet of Sharpie markers. And then I realized that the paint was still a little bit wet. So, of course, the paint goes on the Sharpie marker. And I'm a little bit bummed. and I'm like trying to take it off. And at the time we were redoing the floors of our house, so it's like these raw wood floors. And so I just kind of rubbed the black marker on the floor, and I was kind of fascinated with like, oh, you could see the grain, but I'm in a rush, like I have to take off. So I take off, and then the next morning I see, the black mark on the floor. And then I look at it closer, and I'm like, wow, the wood looks really pretty. And then it just hit me. That's interesting. Black washes everything out. Like you don't see anything under black. But yet, the black ink on the wood, the grain stood out. It was faint, but enough where you were like, wow, that's beautiful. And I saw wood differently. And this is going to sound really crazy, but I felt like the wood. I felt like, oh my God, this is my life. My life is like a piece of wood. All the shit that's happening to me is like the black ink. And look, you can still see me. So then, of course, I get all the different color markers, and I want to see what they look like. And I am now fascinated with it. And I go to Home Depot. Seriously, I love Home Depot. And I go and I get a piece of wood, and I just start drawing on wood. And the first big piece I did was a double panel, and it was of a woman, and she was in the nude, and she had her hands up, and it was like this liberating feeling, which was kind of quite the contrary, because remember, I'm at home, and I'm having to deal with my first marriage coming to the end. Yet, I'm creating these pieces, but that's how I was feeling in my art. I was feeling like, wow, I was able to express myself. So eventually the marriage ended, and I continued to dive into my work, and I was able to sell some pieces to some pretty neat women who were in like the film industry and some political office. And so I had favor, and then other women kept collecting it, and then Day of the Dead came. It was the first time I did a piece of my mom. I wanted to do a piece to honor my mom. And the piece was really haunting, so much so that I would paint her, and then I would have to put the piece downstairs away from me. And I found that when I would paint my mom, especially the first year, I didn't really know my mom. I was coming to learn more about my mom towards the end of her life, a few months before she had passed away. I was asking all these questions, and I was thinking about her, and I found that in my painting her, that was my healing process. As just like when I started to paint when I was coming out of the marriage, it was my healing process. I found like, wow, my mom wasn't with me when I was growing up, but she is so present in my art that, to be honest with you, Angel, me coming back to art, my mom's hands are all over that.
Wow. Oh my gosh, there were so many interesting points. The point about, going to graphic design school to get, ahead in your career and be focused, because that's practical. We can try to manipulate these gifts that we have to conform to what society expects of us, or we've determined that is expected of us. Because a lot of times we blame society, but it's actually our own idea of conformity that messes us up. The other thing that really struck me was that your ex-husband was absolutely right. You were having a love affair with art.
Yeah, I would lose myself. The truth was that I never went to sleep. And I was okay. I was okay with it. And I could still do it. I'm still like a night owl when it comes to my art, because I work full time. I still am in the fundraising business. I help raise money for a lot of large nonprofit organizations. And so my work is very demanding, and it's very rewarding. And I still draw. And I have my family. And so it's still trying to find that balance. But yeah, the belief was that I was having this love affair with art, and it was true. I gave it up, and I didn't realize how much I needed it. It's how I express myself. And it really is a gift.
When you speak to, or when you would speak to a person that was interested in pursuing their art and maybe juggling all of the things that we tend to have to juggle, how could you give some advice on work-life art balance?
I would say every day you do the thing that you love, even if it's just for 15, 30 minutes. What ends up happening is that oftentimes we prioritize in a way sometimes that makes us resentful. So if you're honest with yourself and you say, okay, realistically, this is what I can do, and then you do that. And I think that when you start to do that and it becomes a routine, then I think that it just sticks and you're able to find more of a balance.
How can people find you?
They can find me on social media, on Instagram. I'm Art by Anna Alvarado. I have my website, which is also under the same name. I just opened an Etsy shop that has a lot of my little Freida stuff. But mostly I think I'm most active on Instagram.
Wonderful. Well, Art by Anna, I super appreciate you taking the time to spend with us. And as always, I leave saying al rato.